there, Sparkers. Welcome to another episode of Tips and Tricks. In this Tips and Tricks video, we're going to be looking at a debugger or a debug system. So what is debugging? Debugging is when you go and try to fix the bugs that crop up in your game that you're making or creation. Well, what is a bug? Well, it's a problem, something that's not working as intended. So whether that's, you have an enemy that's not doing what you want it to do, whether that's attacking the character or trying to shoot them, or maybe you have a score that's supposed to increase and it doesn't increase correctly. Basically anything that's not, what the intention is, what you designed, can be a bug. And most bugs in Project Spark creep up by code. You can also think of other bugs, as far as like maybe performance, where if you add too many things. And we actually provide a debugger for that. So if you just go to options here, and if you go to game settings and display system usage metrics, you can actually turn on advanced, let's say here. And if I go to test, this chart will show up in the bottom right corner that gives me kind of counts of different objects and collisions, things like that. And those will turn red as you start getting into more unperformant territory. But we want to do a different type of a debug, something that's more tailored to the game that you're making specifically, right? So let me turn this off real quick. And then just a heads up, to keep this video kind of short and sweet and really talk, kind of get into the best way to do a debug system, we're gonna assume that you have some basic knowledge of certain systems. So if you've watched a couple other tips and tricks videos or a couple of our tutorials, you should be good to go. But if you're a brand new beginner, I probably wouldn't recommend this one, because we'll be seeing a little bit more complicated things like multi-brain for a second, and displaying text in different variables and stuff. So just be warned on that. So this is probably more for intermediate or advanced users. So the setup here, what are we looking at? So I just have a pretty much default character. I have a couple differences in here. I got this logic cube called Debug, which we're going to be in most of the time. That's where all the fun things that we're looking at. And then a quick state manager, and this setup here with just this log and a spawner of enemies here. So if I go to test, this is what we're going to look at and see how this works. The debug system I have. So right now I just have this default character. He's not doing a ton. But I have kind of coded in a special controller combination that'll open up a debug menu. A lot of games do this. So for me, I actually did left trigger and then press in the left stick. And then that opens up a debug menu, and you can see that here on the left-hand side of the screen. And right now I have I have debug, which is like the title, and then none is actually a subcategory. And I can actually page through different subcategories. So I'm using the D-pad to navigate that now that I have that open. So I can use right on the D-pad to switch between different basically subtopics. So I have none, miscellaneous, health, and combat are the ones that I have going. But I'm getting different information displayed to me that can help me as I encounter things during the game. So let's see here. So miscellaneous, I have in zone, and I can also switch between here up and down too. So in zone is a variable that I set for when I get close to this log here. So I approach this, it becomes true now, and this goblin comes out and spawns. But right now you can see I'm in the zone. If I walk out of the zone, it's gonna be false, true, false, etc. So when I get in that zone is what tells it to spawn that goblin. So it's really important to be able to understand and see that variable is in fact coming true. So I can, by displaying that, it's information for me if there was a problem there. Let me just kill this goblin here real quick, punch him down. Another thing I'm looking at here is camera distance. So I'm using just a default camera, but I'm actually setting the distance to my player. And I actually have it where I can toggle between it on the fly during my play session. So if I decide that, hey, this is too close, I can actually test it. And okay, maybe this is better. So I have 10 now instead of 5 as a default distance. And I can actually go and change what that default is. But I can do this on the fly here by changing that variable in my debug menu. So if I get back up to the subtopic and scroll over to the left, so our next one is health. So this is my health of my character. if I approach here and take damage, let's see. So it's actually a number display of what my health bar is actually indicating there. I can actually, if I wanted to test just how I take damage, let me get this all in here. Actually have it toggled where I can hurt myself if I want to, or I can actually heal myself. So you can see my health going back up. I just have it by 25 increment. I can also, let me walk back in the zone here, spawn a goblin. I can also toggle if I'm invulnerable or not. So maybe if I'm playing and don't want to have to worry about, you know, enemies hurting me all the time, but I want to be able to switch back and forth on the fly, I can just toggle that. And finally, I can, under this health menu, I also gave myself the option of, let's see what happens, you know, if I die or not. So I can choose to die, and I'm intentionally not destroying my character at death because I have this debug logic in my character. If not, I would lose the chance to try to fix it. So that's and I'll talk kind of about the benefit or not, if you should actually house your debug logic in the character or not. I can also revive myself from that state. You know, so if I had a system where I you know, respawn in a different place, or you know, I could test that at any point. A lot of times too, when you die, you like move to a different location. You might have to, you know, respawn enemies and things like that. So that would be, you just test it immediately without having to track down an enemy to kill you. And then finally, I have even a combat section. So right here, I have like, you can see I'm scrolling through these. Shooting is just letting me know when I shoot a fireball, it's go switch to true and false. This one actually is I can't interact with at all. It just lets me know I'm on team heroes. Attack hits, so this is actually a number I'm keeping track of. I can think of it tied to a score if I wanted to in a game, but every time I hit an enemy, it's going to go there. And finally, I'm also displaying how many enemies I have in the world. Right now, I'm only going to have one at a time, so you can see that it's 1 right now. When I take out this goblin, it goes to 0. I can also, if I wanted to, just destroy enemies right away as I have that highlighted. So what's really cool about this menu is I can interact with it, right, and do things on the fly, and I think that's what makes it a much more powerful debug system than just only displaying information at you. So let's look at the code and see how that was done. So jump back to edit. So typically, you know, once your game kind of gets larger, you'll have some kind of state manager logic cube which sets up a bunch of variables. This is where in this example, I only have one, but you're assuming that, you know, you eventually, when you ship this game, you're not going to want to have your player be able to access a debug menu. So this is where you would just be able to switch to false and never have to worry about it again. But while you're testing it, you can keep it to true. And that's not, you know, if you don't have a state manager, it's totally fine. This is just a typical way a bigger game would get made, where you would want this extensive debug system. So once that is true, in my character's brain here, in his first line, it's going to recognize that global boolean is true, and it's going to, when that happens, it's going to run once, because it started 2, and add a new brain to my character. So I'm using multi-brain here, and I'm adding all the logic that's housed in this guy, so debug. So this brain is going to stack on top of my player brain now. Then otherwise, this is pretty much default here. You can see that I have a distance that I set specifically for this follow camera, and that's just a number variable distance. I'm keeping track of the attack hits, of my attacks that hit with a number variable attack hits. And I'm also keeping track of enemies by a object set called enemies, and it just increments every time as it goes through how many enemies are out there. Other than that, this is the same brain that you guys have always seen before, and it starts off on the default third-person adventure. Alright, so the debug logic itself. So this is what gets added to my character right now. Let's open that up. So I'm not going to build this from scratch, mainly because I want to keep this short and succinct, but I'm going to kind of go through what's happening, and so you guys would be able to model and build this at home and tailor it to your needs. Okay, so no, I'm not on the first page, excuse me. So first page, this is right away. It's called Debug Main. I want to be sure to name all my pages in here. To do that, you just open up the options and then rename page or rename brain. You want to do both of these things. So the brain's named Debug and the page is Debug Main. First thing that happens is I was able to turn on and turn off the actual debug menu, and then I'm controlling that by this boolean debug display. So I set that to false right at the beginning, and then I also set these two variables right here, and this lets me know how many subtopics I had. So I had miscellaneous, health, and combat, so that was 3. So I want to be able to know basically my limit and my max. So this is the starting selection. So this starts at 0, which is basically there's none. There's no selection. And then there's 1, 2, and 3 for miscellaneous, health, and combat. To toggle the display, here is my controller combination. So you'll want to make sure you do something that doesn't repeat any of the input that you already give your game during play. So if you use right trigger to shoot, let's say, you don't want to say right trigger to also open up my display. You want to do some kind of combination. So like in here, I'm not expecting to do left trigger and press in left stick at the same time very often in play. So that made a good sense to be a controller combination to actually toggle my display. And then if you had, so I'm using D-pad to navigate the menu. If you had D-pad behavior in-game, you could choose, once this was toggled, to make sure it would ignore the other D-pad actions until it was toggled off, let's say. So once that boolean is displayed, everything else is going to be nested under here. So I have this just displays debug of large font on the left side. So this is just where the title is for that menu. And then I also reset what I'm looking at. So debug area is set to 0 and debug selection is set to 0. So this is the subtopic you can think of. So that's going to be none at the beginning, set to 0. And then selection is 0 too, because I can't go up and down or switch between, or I'm starting at 0, I should say. Okay, here is 2 number variables, the ones that we just looked at, debug area and debug selection. I am clamping them by the 2 variables that I set right at the beginning here, the debug area and debug selection. So you can see how I'm setting that. And debug selection is like the way I'm going up and down, and so this will get rechanged by every time I go to a new subtopic. So none has 0 options, so that's why it's set to 0 in the beginning. So as I add more options, I'll be able to change those variables on the fly. So that's why it's set up like that. Okay, so how do I actually change the menus and what I'm looking at? So when I have it selected, just orange at the beginning when it's 0, and so debug area, when it's greater than 0, I'm actually able to use the D-pad to go left, so that this is changing between the subtopics. So know that that's what debug area means. The area is the subtopic. So when I'm using left, I'm able to go down 1 until I get to 0. Once I'm at 0, I can't go left anymore, down 1 in that selection. You have to think of I'm using number variables here as the I'm iterating between those as the heading. So each subtopic has a number associated with that. And then same thing when I'm less than my max area. So in this case it was 3. I'm able to use right to increment up to 3 basically. So I can switch between miscellaneous, health, and combat. Okay. And once my let's see here. So when my debug selection is greater than 0, so when it's not none, I'm going to be able to use the D-pad up to go down, basically. So I'm going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 down the list. So going up actually will decrease that number. And whenever I'm less, this is going vertically in my list. So this is when I'm switching between the options, like how many attack hits have I had, or how many number of enemies are there. And when I'm less than the max selection, I can also go down. So I'll increment my selection variable here by 1. Okay. And finally, so this is here, you can see where when my debug area is 0, I'm actually choosing to display none on that side, and my debug selection, it makes sure that it's just reiterates at 0 again, because I'm going to be switching between these on the fly. So this gets me back to where I am supposed to if I go back to none after starting. Okay, so this is where the actual subtopic areas come into action and come into play. So I'm using each one of those as a separate page that I call to this first page. So when my debug area is 1, that was when I had miscellaneous, and so that displays here just underneath the other area, and I call my next page, which is debug miscellaneous, and I'm using text here to call it specifically rather than numbers or pages in case the ordering changes, which your debug menu as you're changing your game will change all the time, so it's important to make sure to keep this basically as clear as possible. And I actually like to always do my first page as miscellaneous, because what I do is as I keep adding things and wanting to debug them, I put them in miscellaneous first, and then when I get enough, I move them to a new, like I create a subtopic for them, right? Once I have enough things that I'm testing that are like combat related, then I would make a combat heading for it. Debug area 2, health, easy enough, and calls page to the debug health page. And finally, there's third area, and it calls to debug combat. So 30 lines of code total on that first page. Not too shabby. It's a lot of just the inputs and displays, right? UI can be like that. But this basically allows me to navigate through the whole process. And then the rest is letting me, kind of giving me the unique information for those headings. So let's switch over here. Let's go back to the top and switch over to the next page. So if I switch, if I use, in my case, D-pad right to switch over to miscellaneous, it'll call this page, which is debug miscellaneous. So when I do that, it lets me know what my debug selection max is. So that's as far down as I can go. So I only have 2 options. So I would have 2 here. And then I have what happens when I have each of those selected. So debug selection equal to 1 and debug selection 2. So this one here is displaying in zone and then the actual Boolean in zone. So this switches between true and false depending on if it is true and false. When I have it actually highlighted, it's orange, and then when I don't, it's white. So that's how I know what I have selected. And there's no interactability here. It just lets me know if I'm in it or if I'm not in it. So very helpful as I'm testing to make sure that that goblin's going to spawn or not when I hit that zone. Now this one does have some interactability. So this is that camera distance I was talking about. We saw on my main character I had the distance variable used for that follow camera. And so here's that variable. And I'm just displaying it here after my text camera distance. And then what I can do is nested under this. So when I'm actually selected under camera distance and it's highlighted orange, I get the options of using right bumper and left bumper to actually change that variable on the fly. So I'm using an increment of 0.5 meters to go up or down. So again, that is coming from this page. I'm calling that once I have my sub area topic selected, I'm able to call there. So that's what's happening. So all that logic basically gets nested underneath there. So if I'm on debug area 2, it would go over to debug health. And I have 3 options in health. So 3 options here. When I have selected 1, I can see my health, and so there's an actual health indicator tile. So I'm using that here rather than my own, and then I'm using damage and heal to go up 25 or not if I use right bumper and left bumper again. And with these nested underneath, that makes sure it only happens when I'm selecting those specifically. Here I can lets me know if I'm vulnerable or not. Same thing, and then I can toggle between that. So this is like a Boolean state. I'm vulnerable true or invulnerable false, and I can just toggle it using right bumper here. That's what I have selected. And finally, with 3, I can choose, I see if my character is dead or not, and then basically revive or kill. And I could get even more specific on here if I wanted to, right? Right now I can just press revive or press kill, but I could make it so I have to be dead to use revive, and I have to be alive to use kill if I wanted to. And last page is combat. So in this one I gave myself 4 options. This one is, the first 2 are just information to me, letting me know when I'm actually doing the shoot behavior, and this tile recognizes that. So, this is a default combat property or combat event. So it determines whether or not the object is currently firing a projectile. So just showing that after, it'll switch between true and false. On my second, I'm showing just my team name. If I wanted to, I could actually switch my team through this menu if that was something that made sense for my game. So if I all of a sudden wanted to be friends with the goblin, I could do that. Here is my logic keeping track of that attack hits. So here, because I wanted to be able to adjust it on the fly, attack hit is a combat event, but whenever that happens, my character increments this in his own brain by 1, and then I'm able to display that and then change it here. So I'm again using left and right bumper to go up and down, and this would be like if I have a score dependent on it right at the end, or let's say I rather than attack hits, experience gain from killing the goblin, I could basically fly through that. Or like if I have a game and I get to level 5 and get a magic ability, but I want to debug and just see, I want to be able to test that ability right away, then I could just give myself all the experience I need and then test that, but make sure it still unlocks correctly. And then finally, I have that 4 is the number of enemies, which I was using that object set to count to display here. And then I can choose to kill all objects that are part of that object set, just with right bumper. So there you go. So that's how I built this debug menu with submenus. Let me go back to test. We can run through it real quick one more time, and we can even quickly add something, so I can show you how to make this customizable on the fly. So again, left trigger and pressing the left stick to see the debug menu. Use D-pad here for this game in particular to scroll between them. So these are switching between my debug areas, and then my selection is going up and down here. So let's flip that to true. So now I'm invulnerable. So if this goblin tries to hit me, they can't. And while I'm just sitting here, see, I can't actually even use increment damage my health right now while I'm invulnerable. Go up to sub menu, and then let's go to combat, and let's just instant kill this goblin here. And then I can test my zone, go back to miscellaneous. So I'm still in the zone. So once I'm in the zone, this goblin already did spawn, so I have to leave the zone and then come back. There you go. And I can also, let's change back the camera distance here. So we can even see, so if I go really small with the camera distance, so like past 4, there's no, the follow camera won't recognize that minimum distance more. So this looks about the closest I can get before it won't do anything. So that's good to know, right? As I'm trying to test different things in Spark, especially the default. Oh, I came back into the camera range. Go back over here. And let's, I don't want, let's see what happens. If I die, is he going to keep attacking my corpse or not? So let's find out. So let's die. So he does, right? So maybe that's something I would want to change about my goblin's behavior, about how, I don't want him to, maybe I respawn, but I want my enemy to walk away from me once he knows that I'm dead. Let's give myself some health. Oh, I can't. Let's revive. But very quickly, right, on the fly, I can do a lot of different things and understand what's going on here. I can see my shoot, active, go. And I must not be in the zone. There we go. So, very cool. Go back to edit. Let's add one thing so I can show you what that would look like. So let's see. Let's keep track of how many times the goblin, or how many times I get hit. So let's go to debug on this separate brain here. And I'm going to not add a new area. I'm going to just augment. If I wanted to add a new area, I would go here, make this 4, and then I would run down here. Make sure I would copy this logic. So I would post it here, then I would do 4, and then I would make whatever new page. And then I would add a new page in this lane. So if I wanted to do, if I had weapons or something, or an inventory, right, I would do debug inventory, and then it would do a new page. But I'm gonna just let's go add this to the combat page. So I'll scroll over there. Let's make sure, so debug selection max, I'm gonna add a new option, so I want that to be 5 instead. Let's go down here at the bottom. Let's copy this line, drop it in, switch this debug selection to 5, and let's say number of times hit, and this is the text that it is information for me. It's not the variable yet, so I'll go like that, space, get rid of that one, and then let's delete those. And let's do a new number variable. Let's call it times hit. Perfect. And then let's give us the option to increment or decrement times hit. So math increment by 1, and we'll just copy that line, and then we'll switch to left bumper here, decrement by 1. All right, cool. So now I just got to actually set up this variable to actually keep track of that. So if I go back to my character brain, you can see attack hit. So this is when I attack people. Let's do the exact opposite. So attack hit is, if I go combat events, hit by attack. And then I'll do times hit up by 1. Cool. So see, very fast once you have the system set up, it's really fast to continue to add to it, and that's what I love about this particular debug system, and why I prefer to use it. All right, so let's open the debug menu, and I can just to show, I can actually toggle this like on and off. So if I don't want to see it as I'm testing, I don't have to see it. So if I scroll over to combat, I can now see number of times hit here. And so let's approach this guy and let's see if this works. Oh, there we go. So incremented by 1, 2, 3, and then I can actually increase it if I want, decrease it if I want. So there you go. So that's how to add something really quickly to that system. And then just close out of it. Back to edit. All right, and then just because I don't think I showed the logic on this, just in case you're interested, this log, all it's doing is when I approach the trigger zone of it, it sets that boolean to true, and then if there's no enemy, it creates an enemy at that spawn, that logic cube spawn goblin, and then as soon as when I have that toggle true, as soon as I'm not in that zone, it becomes false. So just wanted to make sure you guys could see that in case you want to pause it to consume everything. So yeah, that was a ton of information, and probably went longer than it should have. But as you can see, that's kind of why it was more of an intermediate or advanced tutorial, just because there isn't enough time to explain everything in there. But if you don't know all the intricacies, just look through, pause the video, kind of look at, the different tiles, especially if you're not used to displaying text and like doing a selection process. That's probably what would be most confusing if you haven't encountered that before. So if you have questions about it, etc., or if you think if you want to see a separate video on some element that we glossed over here, just let us know in the comments. One thing I did want to talk about before I head out is I'm choosing to add this debug logic to my character itself. And there's kind of pros and cons with that. So pro-wise, being in my character, I can reference a lot of the variables that are in him just locally. I don't have to make them global variables or, do a reference. It's just kind of cleaner that way. Cons, though, is like, if I want to actually destroy my character, if I don't have a standard character and I'm doing things with them, maybe deactivating the brain a lot, if I have a bunch of cinematics and things, but I still want to be able to debug during that, that's problematic with, housing the logic in the character. So know that. You could also just this is a template being added to the character right now, through add brain. But if I wanted to make a debug separate, I would make this guy not a template and not add brain to him that way. And then make sure I'm using either global variables or references to his actual variables. And that way it would exist independently of the character state. So you really have those. It's kind of the two options there. It really just depends on what makes sense for your game. Generally, I prefer, if I'm not doing anything too crazy with the character, I like to keep it in the character. Just keeps variables and things like that a little bit cleaner. One other problem when you take this guy out now and he's no longer a template and becomes part of the in-game world is the logic cube itself, because it has input inside of it, like all these toggles on and off and selecting the menu, it becomes considered a player to the player object set because it has those inputs. So just be aware of either of those two options. They both exist. Neither one of them are better than the other. It just depends on what you're trying to build. So there you go. I will catch you guys in the next tips and tricks. Bye, guys.
Project Spark is where players create and creators play. What better way to be inspired than to see what's possible? This will surely spark your imagination. Now, how do we begin?